Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IPPS-A Sustainment Webinar Series. Today's webinar is on IPPS-A workflow, and my name is Captain Marisha McLean, and I am one of your primary instructors for today's webinar. Joining as a guest instructor is Sergeant Victoria Brown, an S1 NCO in the Delaware Army National Guard. Before we begin, I have a few items to cover about this presentation and the DCS webinar platform. First, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on both the IPPS-A YouTube channel and the IPPS-A S1Net training and webinar series pages. Second, if your connection drops during the webinar, please close your browser and use the provided DCS link to reconnect. Next, your microphones and phone lines are on mute. You must press 0 to speak. Expect a 1 to 2 second lag when speaking. If you would like to download parts of this presentation during the webinar, please use the download icon that's located below the presentation window, or if you click the link that's currently listed in the chat panel, you can access this webinar's deck in its entirety from S1Net. And lastly, please post your questions to the public chat panel so that we can answer them throughout the session. In addition to live responses, all questions and their corresponding answers will be posted with this video to the IPPS-A YouTube channel and to the IPPS-A S1Net training and webinar series pages. Your questions and feedback matter, so please share. Without further ado, let's begin. All right, so this is our agenda for today. We will begin by highlighting some foundational information about workflow within IPPS-A, and then transition to a demonstration that's led by Sergeant Brown. Now, you'll hear from Sergeant Brown, like I said, primarily during the demonstration portion, but also through this first beginning portion of the brief. We will close today's webinar by revisiting the Q&A from last week, and then also completing a brief survey. So bottom line, IPPS-A workflow is a capability that creates transparency in the approval process and can be managed and changed by HR leaders. I'll give you all a moment to read through the key terms that's listed here, but I encourage you to primarily pay attention to the text listed in blue. All right, so this is a snapshot of the significant roles associated with workflow and the subcategory that each role is aligned to. So as displayed, most workflow functionality is given to users once provisioned as an HR Pro within IPPS-A. The elevated HR Pro Plus subcat includes roles that allows HR leaders to reassign workflow transactions while in flight, as well as auto-approve workflow within IPPS-A's Acts module. See that here with the auto-approve and the workflow admin roles. To highlight a new system enhancement that went into production at the beginning of this month, users with the intermediate approver role can now edit and push back requests in flight. So this enhancement is significant because it allows HR professionals to conduct corrective action without holding up the approval process. Huge win for the field. So here's a quick highlight, just to highlight the types of requests that will generally trigger workflow within IPPS-A. Again, pointing out the Act section. If the user that is submitting the request or the change has the auto-approve role, then those types of workflow or assignment requests will not trigger workflow. So again, just check with your state leadership for guidance to determine who within your organization should have this role. It's a pretty significant role because it will, again, auto-approve assignment changes for individuals or modifications without going to workflow. So shown here are the different types, different approval types that are often included in workflow. So as well as actions that those users identified as approver type can take. Below in the gray box is some additional considerations that I just wanted to highlight. The first one being that for workflow to operate as designed, the originator of the request cannot approve it. Again, aside from the assignment section created with the auto approve role. Also, the approver cannot be a part of the S1 pool that the PAR request goes to for initial routing. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight here is that approvers cannot select an action, who to push an action back to if they use that pushback feature. Actions will be pushed back to the last approver that reviewed the request. So I covered a couple slides at this point. I want to pause for any questions and comments. Again, I know there's a lot of SMEs out there. Please feel free to press 0 and provide your inputs and thoughts on anything that's been covered thus far. All right, so we'll show this slide a little bit more in our demonstration, but in short, a user-defined list is a predefined group of users that HR professionals can create to send actions and requests to. So UDLs are created in the same module as workflow templates, so the navigation path that's listed below is the same if you're going to create a workflow template, which we'll cover next. But UDLs can then be turned into approver types that are included in those workflows. Listed there to the right are just a few quick reference steps on how to create a UDL. Again, probably nothing new to most of our experienced users, but just a good quick little aid to show you how to create that type of list. All right, so workflow template is defined as a predefined workflow routing that can be attached by an S1 pool member to any action. So workflow templates, again, are created and saved within the workflow save as preferences module, and below is the path to that module. And they can be copied and shared for repeated use. Now here I just want to highlight a couple of workflow template features that can be a little tricky. So if you have ran into any of this and worked your way around some of these potential considerations that were not maybe as clear when you first started the process, definitely share your experiences with the group. But for one, workflow templates and UDLs are maintained by the HR professional that created them. So in short, that means that only the template creator can make permanent changes to that template. In addition, changes that are made to a shared template will only update the original template. So up and down communication is going to be key if your unit shares workflow templates and UDLs for approval routing. So I'm going to pause here for any additional comments or questions concerning kind of the management or creation processes of workflow templates and UDLs. So here's something else that we're going to talk about during our demonstration. But this is just displaying a simplified visual of how PARs and requests are routed when workflow is triggered. So most requests are routed to the soldier's home S1 pool unless a C2 relationship has been established. From there, an S1 pool member will review the request and add in workflow approvers with either a workflow template or by means of ad hoc. So ad hoc is simply adding each approver type manually. So you're just going in, clicking that plus sign to continue adding approvers as you see fit based off of maybe a alternate design that doesn't fit within a workflow currently. Once that approval workflow is established, and then the request is processed. Now throughout that process, workflow approvers in the affected soldier will receive alerts on the request location as well as the status, further increasing that transparency that I mentioned at the beginning of this particular brief.
So again, we'll be using the enlisted branch as the name and the description for this user-defined list. There are 4 different methods of selecting the parties to add to the list, but as Captain McLean said, searching by last name in the operator ID is the most efficient, so we'll be using that. Unfortunately, it takes a good 15 to 20 seconds for the list to populate, so for the purposes of today's demo, I've already created the user-defined list that we'll be using here. So our user-defined list has 3 users in it. If I needed to add or delete a member, the plus and minus button on the side here will give me the ability to do that. And then, of course, you'll want to make sure you save before you exit out. I also created an HR systems branch, UDL, which we'll be using when we create our templates with UDLs later on. And the process for creating a template is just the same. Just go ahead and click Workflow Template and then Create. So again, the first thing you'll want to do is enter a name and a description for the template. We'll use enlisted actions for our name and then enlisted branch for our description. I do recommend creating a name specific to your unit or a name that is easily identifiable to anyone who may be using your template due to the fact that these templates can be shared. The public library, mind you, is going to have everybody who's using IPPS-A, their templates inside of here. So it can be difficult to differentiate between the templates that you created versus what others created when there are 50 that are titled enlisted actions. So unlike the UDL, which has a single approval type for that user list, the template allows us to add multiple approval types since this is a routing chain. The approval type drop-down allows you to select an approver, an intermediate approver, which I'll probably say IA for the rest of the demonstration here, or a reviewer. And it is important to note that neither the reviewer nor the IA are needed in the chain. IPPS-A only has a requirement for the approver, but your policy, your SOP, and the situation will dictate how you'll set those up. The template type dropdown is where you'll add the operator ID for a single user or the user-defined list. So for this specific template, we'll be using the operator ID. And again, because it takes a bit of time to populate, I've already created the demo. We'll have 3 in here. We'll have 1 reviewer, 1 intermediate approver, and 1 approver. Once we've added all of these to the routing list, what we want to do is check our sequence. Sequence numbers on the rows show the order in which the work will travel. To see this laid out better, you can click Graphical Preview, and it'll show you how it'll be listed, let's say once you have it inserted into a PAR. You'll note that the reviewer heading is grayed out, again, because there is no action required on the reviewer's behalf. If we inserted the sequences incorrectly, the arrow keys on here will give us the ability to rearrange them, which is quicker than deleting rows and then reinserting rows. So you'll see now we have our approver as sequence 2 and the IA as sequence 3, but we know this is incorrect, so we can use these arrow keys to change them around. The last thing you want to do is share your templates, which you'll use this share workflow template here, and then make sure you save it before you close out. The second template that I had created is one with 2 user-defined lists. And I prefer this because it removes the need to ad hoc multiple user-defined lists into a workflow. This approval chain is already created, and it'll save you some time when you're creating a PAR. So you'll see the graphical preview has the enlisted branch as our intermediate approver, and then our HR systems as the And I want to make a couple notes here. So you'll notice that the public feature is listed for the workflow template, but it is not listed for the user-defined list, meaning that you can share your templates, but you can't share the UDL. A workaround for this is to add a UDL into a template, make it public, and then when you share it and another user copies it, it'll copy not only the template, but also the UDL to their private repository. You'll see here that the template name is going to be grayed out. So once you create this, there's no way to, it seems like there's no way to edit the name. So the workaround for this is going to be to copy the template, enter a new name for it, so we'll just title this name, and then import it. You'll see you'll get a message. It's going to make a copy of this into my private. And then if we refresh this page, you'll see that we now have the old template as well as the new one with the new name. And then you can delete the other one, of course, to make that safe. Also, as we know, and it was listed earlier, that changes made to a shared template will not update the copied template. So a workaround for this is going to be to make the changes that you need to make and then notify the users using your template to overwrite their copy. So this will give them the new template without them having to go in and make all the changes on their own. And then the reassign feature. So let's say a soldier within one of the UDLs or one of the templates has a job change or was transferred and is being replaced with another soldier. The reassign feature allows you to select the current soldier, select the new soldier, and then it'll mass change them out within every UDL, every template that are assigned to. Again, it makes it easier. You won't have to go in and delete the old soldier and add the new soldier individually. I just want to pause here. Does anybody have any questions? So what I was saying before is that a user-defined list or a template, adding it to the PAR is just as easy as it was to create it. In my notifications here, you'll see that I have a qualifications and skills PAR that needs to be actioned. And as you recall before the update, the ability to edit a PAR at the S1 pool or as an IA did not exist. The data fields here on the right were grayed out and additional steps had to be taken to correct any mistakes that were made. So this soldier sent a request to change her MOS. And going through it, like I said, it looked like everything was fine except the primary job code. The skill level that was on here had a 4 listed instead of the 5 to match her being a master sergeant. So now with the ability to edit this while it's in flight, I was able to change this to the proper skill level, continue to review it, and now we can add our workflow to this list. So our user-defined list can be added by clicking the plus sign. We'll choose user list down here, and then the type of authority that they'll have for the action can be added. So in this case, we will use the enlister branch, and we will assert them as an approver. Once we've selected that, we will click Insert. If it needed to be changed, the minus sign in the right-hand corner will remove this from the approval chain. You'll get a notification that says, are you sure you want to remove the node from the approval chain? Go ahead and click OK. This specific action is going to require multiple levels before it reaches the approver. So what we will do is insert the enlisted actions template that we created earlier. To do that, you'll click Insert Template. Put the magnifying glass to search for your template, and then insert. And then you'll see here that everybody is in their proper sequence. We have our reviewer, our IA, and then our approver. If you notice that there is an error within the template or within the user-defined list once you've inserted it, you can click this Edit Template button to go ahead, take you back to Workflow Save As Preferences, make your changes, and then reinsert the template or UDL back into the approval chain. I say that because, again, if you edit something while it's here, it's not going to automatically change over in the PAR that you have open. So you will need to remove this node that you inserted and then reinsert it once you made your changes. And at this point, we would have added our approval chain. We would click Done, do our eligibility check, and then make our recommendation for approval or denial. So at this time, does anybody have any questions?
Right, so I'm going to close out these next two slides. There's been a lot of good discussion actually in the chat panel already surrounding monitor approval. So what I'm going to be providing is going to be very kind of brief. There's some tips and tricks that's already listed in there to kind of pin down your search results to get it to where you can look for individual PARs and requests, or if you just want to scale it down to something that's specific to a type of action. The approvals process and definition IDs, using these two fields together will definitely scale you down to specific PAR or request type, which would be helpful based off of your position and what you're trying to find. Also, header status. So under header status, there's a number of different statuses that a request can be in. Pending most likely being the one that most people will generally select. One of the tips that's already been mentioned is by selecting pending as a header status and then using search, you can use the Control F to further locate an individual soldier a little quicker. So there's multiple ways you can search with IPPS-A. And then to the right is just an example of what your search results can look like. And then moving to the next slide, if you're clicking, let's say one of the results option that's listed here, you can then reassign actions. And now again, you need to have the HR Pro Plus workflow admin role in order to reassign requests in flight. But this is just a quick snapshot of what those steps would look like. So you're selecting the PAR that's in question, and then you go down, select the approver type that's currently in the workflow, select the new approver that you want to be added to the workflow, and then by quickly clicking assign, you can easily change that that person out. Now, if it can only be done for people who are pending, so if this particular PAR was with this particular reviewer, so I could change it at that point. Can't edit anything, like if you try to change out the workflow or add somebody before this guy, you're going to run into issues. You pretty much got to start with where you are and then going forward in the workflow as far as what you can address. But again, I'm going to open the mic for any other questions, comments, and concerns from SMEs or just general users who have been using monitor approvals, and what kind of considerations you would like the rest of the user group to hear to get the most out of that module. So I'll pause there.
So I ran a report here in Virginia, and there's some out there that are almost a year old. And if you open some of them, the people in the middle of the chain are commanders that might have moved on, that had a flag sitting in their inbox and stuff like that. So just from my foxhole, you might have to go in there, at least from the top of the state and from a brigade perspective, and see what's stuck, where is it stuck, and reassign back to someone that's still actively working in that unit so they can adjudicate. But we've definitely found our fair share that are stuck somewhere on someone that no longer works in that office or lost their IPPS-A permissions. Over.
That's a great point. Actually, Chief, if you don't mind, you mind sharing how you generated that report?
Yeah, so if you go back one slide, I changed the first thing on the monitor approval process. Changed that to EOFM. EOFM is your PARs. I don't know why it's called EOFM versus PARs, but that's neither here nor there. Header status pending, and just hit search. So all my PARs that are pending, and I do that for assignments. I do it for special incentive pays as well. But if you hit the ones that all say pending, we had a big list, and I looked at some of the dates that the PARs were kicked off. The standard in our state is for 30 days. Not realistic in some cases, but anyway. So we look at the ones that are over 30 days old and then try to figure out if they're stuck somewhere and just no one's asked about them or looked at them lately.
Thank you, Chief, for sharing that. So for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and continue on. So again, we are starting this new initiative where we want to highlight a couple question and answers that are on like our closed Facebook page and other social media pages that users like you are asking, and also providing tips, tricks, and answers for. And so we love to see the communication that's happening on those platforms, and we strongly encourage you to continue on with that. And here we wanted to revisit the Q&A that was introduced last week. So last week, there were some additional steps in the recommended process that just kind of muddied out what we was really trying to show here. And so here, after talking to a couple SMEs and states, this is generally the way a lot of users are navigating this particular problem. When you need to create a new assignment for a soldier that is now MOSQ, who was not previously qualified in their current position, the best way or more efficient way to do it is to have basically the HR Pro Plus user with the auto-approved, auto-arrive roles submit that assignment. Now, I also am aware that, there's some state processes where, an HR Pro would create the assignment and kind of leave it in a draft, and then a Pro Plus would go in and actually approve it and, push it through, or the HR Pro Plus just creates the assignment and then just be done with it. But this is a recommended way. Essentially, it's probably the simplest way to ensure that you don't have any adverse effects on the soldier's benefits and pay. But again, follow your state SOP and guidance as far as the way that your leadership has determined works best for your organization. But just wanted to kind of put that amendment and clarification out there that it's an easier way to do it. 4 steps is still a lot compared to what you've done in the past, but it's all in the Audible system where you can go back and check and see who did what. And that's one of the biggest good things about IPPS-A is the fact that you can audit. That's a way. HR Pro Plus is down at the battalion. Definitely different opinions about that because how much power that role could have, but it is an option for consideration for sure. All right, so again, this was what we covered today. This was a beginner's kind of course, and we definitely got into some good question and answer and this discussion in general that we need to pull out, and we will pull out for future webinar content. So I appreciate everyone who shared and asked the tough questions. Some of those I wish that they were already more, defined for you users, but that's what we're doing these things for, is to find out what gaps need to be filled and then fill those gaps with relevant information so that you can do your jobs more efficiently within IPPS-A. As normal, this is just a quick reference slide to our IPPS-A S1Net page. If you go to guides, there's a number of different tools and references there listed. The training webinar series folder also lists previous webinar content, and by searching YouTube and going to our webinar series playlist, you can access the edited content that is currently out there. We're pretty current. Last week's webinar is still pending some final edits, but that content, if you want to review the recorded, is available. If you could just please provide a quick answer to at least questions 1 and 4, just to know whether or not this was helpful, and then also to highlight what other things we should be focusing on as we continue on our planning for training content. And just to close out officially, I would like to thank everyone for joining in for today's webinar. I am going to keep this conference line open for an additional 10 minutes so that further questions and comments can be added to the chat panel. Again, please visit our social media pages and subscribe to our YouTube channel for webinar postings, functional videos, and news from the IPPS-A team. Thank you so much for joining.